Hey everybody, welcome back to the Court of Random Opinion. My name is Neidigh, and for those of you who don't know, that thing back there is my dog Butter. He just got a haircut, so he looks a little different. He's usually a lot fluffier. Anyways, I've been following along with the Nick Reiner case, and I know he has his arraignment tomorrow, and then I had seen a little bit of an update in some of the headlines today that I wanted to talk about. I've mostly been going over this from a mental health perspective. If you've seen my past videos on this case, which I'll link to in the comments below if you haven't, I worked in a hospital with emergency psych patients. So when patients would come in with an emergency that needed to be, determined if they had to be hospitalized or not, or if they could be discharged safely, I would help the doctors do that. They would consult my department. And we also had a lot of patients that would come from the jail to see if they needed to be hospitalized as they were, waiting for trial. I talked more about my background and my education and all that in my previous videos on this. So if you want to hear more about it, you know where to go. It was previously reported that Nick was placed under suicide precautions at the jail. One thing I think some people didn't understand about that was that if you have like suicidal thoughts or certain mental health conditions, depression, that kind of thing, some of that can be managed within the jails. But there are other conditions and other symptoms like florid psychosis that would require that person to be removed from the jail facilities and taken to an actual hospital. And there's been a lot of discourse online about Nick's mental health and how that will factor into his court case because there were widespread reports that he had been previously diagnosed with schizophrenia, but also had co-occurring substance use disorder. His mental health and his ability to understand what he was doing and whether or not it was wrong will come into play, and it has to be at the time of the crime. So not now and not before it happened. It has to be at the exact time of the crime. Did he know what he was doing? Did he know that it was wrong? That kind of thing. And I think we're a pretty long way from hearing those types of arguments. I mean, tomorrow's just supposed to be an arraignment. But the reason this topic came up again today is I'm now seeing reports that he has been taken off suicide watch ahead of his arraignment tomorrow. And I think most people who are watching this video already know this, but Nick Reiner is being charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder for allegedly killing his parents, Rob and Michele. So here it says Nick Reiner is no longer on suicide watch at the Twin Towers Correctional Facility in downtown LA. When Nick entered the jail system on the morning of December 15th, he was swiftly placed under heightened supervision. They say that he's currently being housed in solitary confinement and he's required to wear certain clothing. Up until now, that had included this, they make you wear this suicide prevention smock if you're a suicide risk. But since he's now been removed from suicide watch, he will no longer have to do that. The sheriff's source says Nick will not be released from high observation housing unless a judge or a court hearing determines otherwise and will continue to be monitored and housed alone. Now, when they mention high observation housing, this is kind of like a special observation for people with acute mental health crisis or a heightened risk of harm to themselves. And I think what that means and how that process goes is going to be different based on where you are. Usually the goal is to stabilize someone, ensure the safety of that person and others, and then to move them back to the lower level of housing. The people who are remaining in high observation housing, they're supposed to have a severe enough mental health condition that it's not really possible to manage it without that higher level of observation. They have more frequent supervision. I mean, they're checking on these people at least every 15 minutes in most cases. They're more closely watched with things. Like there are certain just regular items that patients in a mental health facility or somebody in high observation housing in these jails, there are certain things they can't have access to unsupervised because they might use it to hurt themselves. If you're looking at just a mental health facility, a lot of times it's like you can't have shoelaces or anything like that because you never know if somebody's going to hurt themselves with a shoelace wrapped around their neck, that kind of thing. So there are dozens and dozens and dozens of ways that somebody can try to hurt themselves, and you have to try to prevent all of them. So people have really limited access to things. Generally speaking, people in HOH, they're supposed to have access to more support, which in theory makes sense, but in practice, I'm not sure that it always works out that way. I don't know. Again, it's going to vary based on where you are. And the quality of care is definitely going to vary based on where you are. So at some point, they'll have to determine, assuming that no other symptoms arise or he doesn't become psychotic or anything like that, assuming that the suicidal thoughts were the, predominant issue and that's the persistent issue, they're going to have to decide if high observation housing is necessary in that context. Because if someone has persistent episodes of thoughts of self-harm like that, there are some situations where that will no longer be considered an acute issue if they don't have some sort of immediate plan or desire or intent to harm themselves. And it's the thoughts are just entering your mind. That can be treated differently sometimes at a lower level of care than somebody who has an acute crisis with a desire and intention to act on the thoughts they're having right now. Now, people hear this stuff and they think suicidal, but also think homicidal thoughts. So threats of harm to others is also an important thing to monitor. And I could understand if that was also a factor at play, given he's accused of murdering his parents. But I can only go off of, what's being reported because I don't have any sort of special insight into his specific case. So kind of a small update, but I have been following along with this stuff and I'm interested to see how it goes. So I just wanted to touch base just in case anyone else is following along as well. Appreciate you watching. Thanks, everyone. I will see you all pretty soon. Bye.